Welcome to The Feed, powered by Loblaw. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. We conceived of The Feed podcast as an opportunity to showcase thought leaders, tastemakers, innovative food and health brands, and yes, a few key Loblaw executives who are making a difference in the grocery and health industries, together helping Canadians live life well. In this episode, I head to Ottawa to sit with Steve Poloz, former governor of the Bank of Canada, for a no-spin masterclass on the economy Canadians actually live in. Reflecting on the lessons and predictions from his book, The Next Age of Uncertainty, released in early 2022, Poloz breaks down for us the forces colliding all at once: AI that might be moving faster than the job market can absorb, tariffs that could wipe trillions off the global economy, and the real reason beef, fuel, and fertilizer keep pushing your grocery bills higher. But this isn't a doom forecast. It's a roadmap. Why Poloz is betting on technology, trade diversification, and finally tearing down Canada's own internal trade barriers to protect the standard of living we've built. Let's get into it. Steve, welcome to The Feed. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much.
Well, it's great to be here in my hometown of Ottawa. Thank you for hosting here at the Osler offices. Are you born and raised here?
No, I was born and raised in Oshawa,
Okay.
Near Toronto, of course. And,
Yeah.
and I moved to Ottawa the first time in the early 1980s. So we've been here for a long time. And
Yeah.
It's home now.
Well, listen, it's great to see you. You and I have talked before, just after the release of your book, what is that now, 4 years ago, on my other podcast, The Voice of Retail. Now, between then and now, a few things have happened. What have we got? The end of the global pandemic, European war, 2 Middle Eastern wars, one continues, and the rise of generative AI. So a few things have happened since we last spoke.
Yeah.
And I guess I almost forgot the upending of global trade, the global trade regime. So we're going to talk about a few of those. So a familiar name to many, many people, but perhaps not to everyone. Tell the listeners about yourself, your background, and how you got to be who you are, what you do today for a living.
Well, I'm retired now. As you may know, I started off in economics at Queen's and then went to Western. And by the way, Peter Hallett, the Nobel Prize winner, was one of my professors at Western on my thesis committee. Great person. And anyway, so we ended up in Ottawa because I wanted to work for the Bank of Canada. I chose that from a very young age, that was my thing. Like the way a kid picks, I want to be a firefighter. Yeah. I said I wanted my signature on the money.
I want to be the governor of the Bank of Canada.
That became my thing, back in 1974.
Yeah.
And pretty well 40 years later, I became governor. A long, winding road between then and then. But turned out to be a real fabulous role to play. Lots of interesting things and never a dull moment. And now that I'm retired, I'm a special advisor here at Osler, Hoskin Harcourt. And I'm on a couple of corporate boards.
Right. And an author as well. So we're going to talk about your book. I guess, many Canadians may have known of the role that you occupied for, 7 years?
Yes, sir.
But they probably have a higher awareness of it these days, given but someone who took the role subsequent to you, I think.
Successor, yes.
Has gone on to other things, sits in the Parliament.
Predecessor, yes.
Your predecessor.
Yeah, Mark Carney, immediately my predecessor as governor. And we're old friends in any case. But yes, he's definitely fallen into a whole new line of work. And I think he's doing great. I mean, he's you have a lot of confidence in what he really wants to achieve.
Sure.
The sort of same things that any of us as economists would say. Well, these are the top 5 things we want to fix if we get that opportunity.
Sure.
And here he is. He's got the opportunity.
Well, it's interesting. He's our second prime minister with a deep economics background.
That's
And Stephen Harper had a PhD in economics, right?
I believe it was an MA, but. Anyway,
Yeah,
I won't quibble on that.
He
but
spent a lot of time studying
He's a superb
economics.
economist. He knew his stuff inside out, no question. He still does. So when I was appointed by the Harper government as governor, and we used to have great conversations between us, sitting on the dock or whatever.
Yeah.
And so a very stimulating kind of person, very much into the ins and outs of economics and what's the latest thinking on things. Yeah.
Well, we certainly need every sharp mind possible these days. We've got, so many things. Now, you kind of predicted this. I'm not sure you had a crystal ball, but I'm going to ask you at the end of the interview to get that crystal ball out again with your book, The Next Age of Uncertainty. You described a world that would almost returned to be more chaotic. And you kind of helped us remember that things weren't always this smooth. It's kind of a post-World War II, if you can say it. There's a lot of turmoil, if you go back a couple of centuries, in the world. And you thought we would return to something like that. Now, this is 4 years ago, so there's a lot of things that happened between then and now. My question for you is, as you reflect on the book, is what's happening today fit the model, exceeded the model, falls short of the model? How do you feel about the disruptions that we face today?
Well, it's a great question. 5 years ago, I was speculating that we would, in time, see a rising tide of risk and volatility because I identified these 5 forces that were acting. They're the kind of forces that act slowly, like technological change or demographic, population aging. These are really big forces you can't ignore, and yet, as economists, we usually do ignore them because they're not moving quickly.
Right.
Like the way we ignore the tectonic plates under California until the day we don't.
Right.
And so those slow-moving processes, I thought that was what was going to happen, but did I expect? Honestly, yes, this is exactly the sort of thing that I thought would happen. I didn't think it would quite happen this quickly. And I suppose, as one who predicted uncertainty, I should be the last person to not expect the unexpected.
Right.
And here we are. And I suppose the Trump renaissance played an important role.
Sure.
I would not have assumed that would happen, although in the book I speculated that rising income inequality would promote that sort of populist kind of election.
You didn't exactly predict Trump, but you did say, and Trump perhaps is a manifestation of broader things that have happened in the U.S.
Sure.
Now, some would lay that at the feet of whether they, half the population did not prosper from free trade, for example, right?
That's right.
And there's certainly some truth in that.
Yes.
This bifurcation of incomes. You see this extreme polarity now in the U.S. What is it, the top 1% of 10% of the income? In the retail space in America, almost 55% of all sales are done by 10% of the population.
Yeah.
So you can see this bifurcation, and I think you can see it here as well. Does the pace of change in technology surprise you at all? I was looking at this chart, and it said the number of months it took to get YouTube to 100 million followers was like, I don't know, about like 7 years. It was many, many months. And for ChatGPT, it was like 2 weeks. It feels like, is that an artificial construct? Things are moving faster, or is that just technological adoption? Did you predict, as an economist, would you, wow, that is really fast, it's changing fast, and is it a cycle of replication that is really hard to manifest where it's going?
Tough question. I would say, I think of this as the fourth industrial revolution. That contains a clue, which is that there's only been 3 of these in the past. So that would be the steam engine, which took decades to get fully implemented. Electricity, which also took, fewer decades, but still decades.
Sure.
And you want to see how that works, watch Downton Abbey and electricity starts showing up. It's really fun to see it from the top of the house and the bottom of the house. And then the next one was the computer chip, and that was much faster than the first 2.
The Moore's Law kind of
That's correct.
Principle, right?
And then this one, I think we ought to assume it would be faster. And yet the thing is that we have to understand that it doesn't happen overnight. So the computer chip, the PC showed up at the Bank of Canada, like 1983, thereabouts. And, as macroeconomists, we didn't see any of those macro effects until around the mid-90s. And then they took about a 10-year period to fully accumulate. So even that being fast was roughly a 20-year wave, sort of S-shaped. The technology kind of picks up speed fast, like you say we see with ChatGPT. And then you get the productive phase when everybody's truly implementing a general purpose technology. And then, of course, the progress levels out.
Yeah.
It continues, but it gets slower. And I expect to see exactly the same thing happen, and presumably more compressed than what we saw with the computer chip. But still, even if it was measured in 10 years, that would be twice as fast.
Right.
And we're barely getting started. So you can't look around the window and say, there's nothing happening. We know in the real world there's productivity leaps using these new technologies every day. So eventually it's going to show up as a macro phenomenon.
I had the opportunity, and I don't want to dwell too much on generative AI, but it is, I think, a big disruption in many ways equal to the COVID era and in terms of consumer habits, for example. We're going to talk lots about that. I had the chance to interview Mark Zandi from Moody's. He's an economist. And his worry, and he seems to be seeing footprints of this in the labor market, is that the adoption is so fast that it starts to get ahead of the labor market, and we have a great disruption in unemployment. And he seems to see some footprints in that. Mm-hmm. Now, every second day, some big firm says, I'm using AI, so I'm laying people off. Yep. It feels a little bit like I'm going to use that as an excuse to put that in the window. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty good thing to put in the window these days, given the amount of value being created by AI companies. What's your thought? Can these things move too fast and get ahead of the labor markets?
Yeah, well, you have to think about people's incentives. If you're a corporation and you're, of course, making investments, always new investments in new technology, but here comes a wave, you don't want to be the last company to say, oh, I'm deploying this new stuff and it's going to really enhance our cost structure and it's going to give more returns to the shareholder. Well, that's their incentive, to be out there ahead of it and to say so. But what we learned the last time is that it took quite a while for the actual returns to accumulate in a macro sense. So no one wants to be last, so that's the incentive. And always remind yourself, well, why are they saying that? Well, you don't want to be holding the stock where they haven't deployed any AI yet, do you? So right. And so
you want to be a fast. I used to describe it as it's good to be. I was with Hudson's Bay, RIP Hudson's Bay for a while. Yeah. And from a technology perspective, we were big, but not compared to the global giants. So we said, how about we be a fast follower? We don't want to be the ones taking it on head on. Yeah. I've often described businesses in Canada as being or having a diseconomy of scale, right? We just don't have the same scale, so we got to make different decisions. Does that resonate with you?
I think that's appropriate. What we know is that the companies that are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange have quite strong productivity growth because they are deploying new technology, whereas the other over 80% of companies are struggling to adopt new tech because, of course, it costs real money to do, and there's a lot of other stresses going on at the same time. So the question you're really asking is about how does this interact with the labor market? Of course, what happens is in any industrial revolution, man, let's remember our history, we get that K-shaped economy. Why does that happen? Well, it's like the income distribution. It's because there's winners and there's losers from every new thing. And the losers, you immediately think of the people who either lose their jobs or can't get a job because somehow the ground is shifted.
Sure.
And so, and what happens though is as that unfolds, and we're talking years, then the money that's being made gets spent. So like I say to people, people must have made a boatload of money by producing that iPad. Inventing that and producing it, that's a tool that everybody's using like amazing, right? Well, where'd they spend all that money? Not on iPads. They spent the money on everything else. Sure. And so what happens is we get this general lifting of all the boats. All jobs in the economy go up because in the third industrial revolution, the computer chip, there was a 15% increase in general income. Completely out of thin air. That's the productivity gain. And it went to everybody. So what happens in the end is we create more jobs than are destroyed. But often the created jobs are different from the destroyed jobs. Sure. And so when in the sense of getting ahead of it, it is that maybe the disruption becomes very tangible while we're waiting for that second effect. Right. And that's why things like the government's program they just did, for the apprenticing and the red seals, right? For the trades. That's a really important initiative because that's the kind of place where you expect all those boats to rise. Yeah. It's why, for the last several years, it's been so hard to get somebody to do a renovation in your house or even, have an electrician come in or whatever, working way out ahead. So that becomes a constraint on growth in the economy. And so you can do investments as a government to try and speed up that adaptation process. And those are
you can
great
import
jobs.
talent, but it comes, plus or minus. It's better, I think, to invest in the talent. I think that's a great program.
It's true. We still have to import talent because as a nation, we are no longer producing as many workers as we have today.
Right.
So our population and our workforce will actually decline without immigration.
Yeah.
So where we were, say, 3 or 4 years ago with roughly a 1% trend line, that was predictable, stable, and it was essential building block of growth.
Yeah, it's just math, right? Population growth is just math, both in North America and many Western countries.
Usually it is.
Births and deaths, and
That's
you
right.
know, it's projections, and it's just, you can go out 30 years because people that will be in the workforce 30 years from today were born yesterday, or born today, right?
But what's special about now is that we had a bulge in workers in my age group in the post-war period, the baby boomers, and those baby boomers, of course, all entering a retirement phase. And so what happens is we actually get a literal slowdown or even a shrinkage of the workforce at that time because there's not enough people coming in the other end to offset them. Has a lot of stresses and strains like on healthcare, longer-term care, and of course the other end of it is, baby boomers like ourselves who really struggled in the 70s to get that first job.
Yeah.
And here we go again. So we got technology mixing up with that.
Interesting.
Right? So it's the first industrial revolution ever when we've had, I think, a shrinking workforce at the same time as we're eating into the jobs with the new technology.
Yeah.
So it's a little harder to predict the outcome. I think it's going to be more balanced than what we saw in previous industrial revolutions.
Let's shift gears. Let's talk about global trade. So, our biggest trading partner has kind of upended trade around the world, not just with Canada. Our Prime Minister describes a world where close ties to the U.S., obviously very convenient, very good for our economy, kind of the benefit of geography and a bunch of other things. Right. Prime Minister Carney describes it as becoming a weakness. I think that can be misinterpreted as in, our relationship with America is a weakness. It's not, but we have a dependence on it. I was at CL last week in Montreal, and many of the food brands are saying, I want to go to Mexico, I want a reliable partner, I want to go global. I think in years past, they might have said, how fast can I get to the U.S. market? So I think there's been a transition of thinking about that. Can it be that as they restructure trade, as we think about restructuring trade, can the economic models that you worked with, that you studied and implemented as the governor, do they still work?
Well, they still work, but they don't work as well as they did in the past. They won't work as well when something like that is affecting it. None of the big forces that I identified in the book are built into economic models. As I said before, they're just kind of slow moving, so you don't. So they're trend lines, so you can just abstract from them. And what I argued in my book is that even if we could incorporate them in models, the result would be almost nonsense because technically the models would then spit out chaotic solutions. So the implication is that the world is headed for a more chaotic future as those things interact. So looking at those things individually, though, is still possible for us. And the one you're highlighting, trade, is probably the best understood of all of the economic phenomena that we study. So I ask you a simple question, do you do your own dry cleaning? Quick.
No.
No, of course not. Do you make your own ketchup?
No.
No. Well, we trade for those things, right? We trade with people who specialize in those things.
Because they're better at it.
Yeah,
and
they're
more
better at
efficient
it, and they have scale and, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we do our thing, we get money, and then we can go and buy the things from other specialists. And so that's what trade is.
Right.
When it goes to an international level, it's still just people like you and me buying things from another country as opposed to from each other. So there's nothing really fancy in that. But that means we really understand it well. And what it means is when we do it the right way, it's super efficient. Like you get a good deal on ketchup because you didn't make it yourself. It might take several days of all the process and all that.
Right.
And you only make a little bit. And the next thing you know, you got to do it again. Putting this big disturbance into the global trading system that the U.S. is doing is a bit like throwing sand into that wonderful machinery on a finely tuned Camaro that suddenly doesn't work as well.
Right.
It stops for a second, then you kind of get it going again, and then it never goes as well as it used to. So what it means is the whole world economy will be less efficient than it used to be. Okay? that machinery will slow down. We will have lower incomes everywhere. That's a promise. And we'll have a slower growth rate of our incomes in the future because that efficiency will affect that long-term trend line. So we can put that in our model. It's a simple experiment like what if the United States just puts 10% on everything like Costco membership kind of a thing. Right? That's kind of our simple way of boiling down what we've been dealing with. Well, the models that we have, the IMF and the OECD and others, suggest that we will lose around 2% of world incomes as a result of that change. That's an efficiency loss. And on top of that, the world economy will grow more slowly from then on by around 0.5 point per year. You say, wow, those are small numbers, Steve. Wow, what can that add up to?
Right.
Well, it adds up to a lot. Over a 10-year period, it's $40 trillion of income that will evaporate. Okay? So
evaporate, so to speak, in inefficiency.
It's just like dragging a weight on your back that you don't need to. Carrying a big weight just for the exercise as opposed to because you need the stuff that's in your backpack.
Yeah.
Okay, so nevertheless, it may be possible we have to simply accept it. For security reasons or Lord knows what the real reasons are. Yeah. It just is.
It feels like the United States went with a lot of global trade. I mean, going all the way back to Clinton, who signed the NAFTA agreement, and they're going to try something else for a few years. They're going to see if that works better for them,
maybe
one way, shape, or another. I mean,
but so far it's highly targeted on things that are considered to be super important strategically. Like you can't be a big defense or a big military power if you don't have your own steel and aluminum businesses, let's say. Well, okay, you don't want to. It's not like a dry cleaners. Right. It's a little different, right? Sure. So we may, as Canadians, of course, we're more trade dependent than the typical advanced nation, and so we may have to accept it. And what we have to try to do then is develop replacements for the loss. Now, it's not the same as offsets. Offsets would be a quick tax cut or a quick reduction of the GST or increasing the family benefit. Those things are offsets, but then you can't really. They don't pay for themselves, right? You somehow have to find a way.
You fund them somewhere.
Yeah, you have to fund them. But what I mean by replacements is changing your rules or changing your incentives so that, let's say, you can grow your conventional energy business because it's been sort of held fairly low growth, let's say, for the last decade or longer, and or develop brand new things like critical minerals, which has been sort of really held back by red tape and so on. But that's a promising thing. If you're going to lose 2% of your economy, well, they built the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and that added 0.5 back, right? It took 10 years, and so there was negatives all along the way, but then. So if you do more of that, you can replace the losses that are coming from this rupture with new things, or develop the defense business, since that seems to be a bit of like the new era. And, of course, look for new trading partners so that you don't stop trading with your favorite customer in the United States. You look for a couple of new customers somewhere else, and so that you grow your business that way. And we have the trade agreements to put an umbrella over those.
We've got great trade agreements, particularly on the ag side. We often think of countries in the trade business like India, who has the biggest population. If we layer onto these disruptions, the environmental disruptions, and I'm going to put that together with the rising cost of beef, for example, the rising cost of food in general. I mean, we saw that coming out of the pandemic. We still have significant increases in the cost of food globally. We're, I think, leading the G7 right now in terms of the percentage of inflation just in food. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of end of sight of these things. What do you see as the key drivers behind that?
Well, some of the things you mentioned are, I think, pretty obviously special cases. Like beef is everybody's favorite thing to point to. And I think that can be laid at the feet of persistent drought conditions, and we've basically gone into a major down cycle in that business, and that means prices will be high. When we first took economics back in the 70s, we called it a cobweb model because, say there's a drought, if less, price goes up, so you try to produce more, produce too many, price goes down, then you produce less, and you keep eventually finding where you're supposed to be. But that is a special case. I think, first of all, people have to remember that inflation is a cumulative thing. So we say, oh, inflation went up to 4 or 5%. It went higher than that actually after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
Sure.
Well, it was temporary, let's call it that, a roughly 2-year bulge in inflation.
Yep.
And then it went back to normal. Well, prices went up, but we didn't have negative inflation, And so you got that cumulative effect.
It lifted the floor.
It lifted the floor. That's right. Secondly, let's not forget that we do have supply systems here in Canada, like for dairy and poultry. Those things are also kind of a price floor. They're there to make stability for producers, but a stability with never a downside, right? So it prevents competition, it prevents a downside in the price. So when something happens to raise costs, then the prices go up. And they never come back down.
And sometimes it works for us, sometimes it works against us.
Exactly.
The Americans had thanks to a pandemic amongst chickens, the egg prices went skyrocketing.
That's an example, yeah.
And for a whole bunch of reasons, supply management being one of them, that everybody communicates together, you don't compete. There was much easier kind of control on it. Now Canada is a superpower in agriculture. And the thing I hear most from people is, wait a minute, if we're a superpower in agriculture, why are we facing so many cost increases? It seems ironic that aren't we producing at least very sophisticated inputs to final goods, to your talk about processing?
Yeah.
Is it a diseconomy of scale in the country? Is it, I interviewed Kim Furlong, Retail Council of Canada, and she described this regulatory layering. In other words, there's a lot of regulations, provincial, federal, but what are the things that in your mind kind of lead to this, is it our inability to adapt or absorb these prices and therefore winds up on the shelf?
Yeah, well, I know Kim very well, and that she's exactly right. That's, of course, a contributor. I won't go into that really. We know that there's layers of red tape, and there are regulations that, they may be for our own good. They would be packaged up.
They're there for a reason.
They're there for a reason.
Yep.
There are inconsistencies between provinces often, which kind of adds to your costs, those kinds of things. But I think also we need to remember that often when something like this happens, like right now we've got prices went up because of the Trump tariff regime, and then Trump prices have gone up again because of the conflict in Iran. Things that we call the triple F, food, fuel, fertilizer, okay? And that's important to everybody because we all eat, or we all stuff has to get delivered. There's the fuel.
Yep.
So when things are an input, like fertilizer, well, you put fertilizer in the ground around now, or even before now, and then you grow the stuff, and then it gets processed, and then by the next winter, it's on the shelf in a bottle of ketchup. Right? Well, that's a long time. Right. And so even if the price of fertilizer goes back down next week, that's too bad. That cycle has been ruined by that price bulge. And the same thing for fuel, and all those are inputs into the process. And that's why back after Russia invaded Ukraine, it was nonsense to say to people, that'll be transitory. We're not worried about that.
Right.
Well, transitory, yes, but it takes a full year to work its way through the production cycle. And then because we measure inflation now compared to 12 months ago, a year-on-year calculation, then it therefore takes 2 full years for it to go away. Yeah. Nobody on the street thinks that is transitory. Yeah. Right? It's just the wrong word. But it was temporary, and it mostly went away by itself, and that will happen again. Yeah. But as I said, the cumulative effect will remain. And so, here in Canada, you say, well, we've got all this. We got produced fertilizer. Sure. Yeah, well, we produce our own oil.
Go to Saskatchewan, lots of potassium there.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And so what's the deal? Well, we exist in a global market, just like for oil. I mean, we don't get to choose our own little prices here. Yeah. If we did, we'd be a closed economy. We wouldn't make any of the money that we make by selling all that stuff to the world. And that's a really important thing that we do. And so, we have to live with that as an ebb and flow. And when we get down to it then, those cumulative effects will increase our cost of living and be permanent. But think about the size of Canada, okay? Yes, we produce the world-class fertilizer out in Saskatchewan. But, in eastern Ontario, a lot of farms, where the ketchup comes from, down in Leamington, let's say.
Yeah.
They use fertilizer too. But you know where that fertilizer mostly comes from? It comes mostly from Russia.
Right.
Even today, given the state of affairs. And why? It's so much cheaper than trying to move that stuff all the way by rail, all the way across.
That's a diseconomy of scale.
That's a diseconomy of scale, and probably is an illustration of we have some constraints maybe on our transportation networks that would be good investments to kind of, grease the wheels, so to speak. Yeah. So anyway, there are lots of things that we could do maybe to reduce those prices. And I'm sure Kim has many more than I have that are more regulatory in scope. But at a macro level, it's something we may just have to accept. And that means we get that income squeeze, what we call kind of the Dutch disease kind of problem, where prices have gone up on essentials. There's less money for other things. Therefore, we get sort of a
crowding out,
a recession almost, at least, quasi one in the other parts of the economy. And it could be simply tourism. Like you may not have as much money to drive across Canada this summer, that kind of thing. And so when that happens, it's as if the economy has its head in the oven, right? And its feet in the freezer. On average, it might look roughly right, but it's a very uncomfortable place for the economy to be.
The tyranny of averages, right?
That's right.
Look at it today. I mean, you've got, our benefit on the benefit side. We feel we're getting this higher price per barrel thanks to, unfortunately, the war in Iran. It looks good in the short term, but in the long term, we feels like we're getting the benefits today, and we're going to be paying the costs.
Well, that's it, because you may be great for the producing areas of the country, understood, and for shareholders and so on, but then it may not be so great for the everyday users, right? And you can't wake up today and say, oh, shucks, I'm just going to go buy an electric car, so I'll use less gas. Right. You may drive less instead, and driving less may mean, well, I'm not going to take that vacation or whatever you cut. Or you just don't have as much money as you'd like to have for anything else that you need. Yeah. So things go down.
Essentials versus discretionary goods.
We call it stagflationary shock. It's not necessarily high inflation or big stag, but it slows the economy while boosting prices at the same time, which is a very big quandary for central banks.
I want to tap into your experience. 7 years, right, as the governor.
That's right.
So you would have had a meeting or many dozen with very, very senior political leaders, civil servants, privy council, whoever. We wanted to ask about maybe your advice, or what's your advice in dealing with government officials, and the grocers have been kind of in the bullseye, and how do we have this broader discussion with policymakers that the grocers 70+% of the price arrives at their back door. They really have been put in the window as, let's go talk to the grocers, let's get them in front of Parliament. But, we didn't see major packaged goods firms who are shipping in hauled in front of the government. So what's your advice about how to message that, communicate, how they make decisions? What's your experience?
Well, that is a tough one. I believe that there is a pretty decent understanding of how the supply chain works.
Right.
And, of course, we have a very recent episode, 22, 23, 24, where we can say, well, that's exactly how it works. You triple the price of fertilizer, you double the price of fuel. Here is what happens. The entire world saw a 5 percentage point increase in inflation. Central banks said it would be transitory. It took 2 years, as we discussed a moment ago. And then it's mostly gone, right? But the price effect remains. So we can look at that and say, well, that's going to happen again. It's not mysterious. And so ask yourself, why do we get to the point where only the retailers are somehow responsible? Well, that's you go to the grocery store at least once a week, twice a week, whatever.
Sure.
It's like the gas stations. They must be ripping me off because I see the sign on my way down the street. I see it several times a day maybe. Yeah. And why does it go down at night? I don't get it. It's right. It's a funny system. But to understand the other side of this is politics. Politics is absolutely the hardest job on earth. We like to poke them in the eye, right?
Sure.
Not doing it perfectly. But being answerable to your constituents in a broader outfit through like social media, it's like getting your report card every 5 minutes.
Sure.
You can never be right, too, because there's millions that disagree with you no matter where That's it. And so there's always a tendency to oversimplify the problems that we face to appeal to that, trying to make sure people get it, and that you look like you're doing your job. And I'm not trying to blame here. It's just think about how hard that is.
Yeah.
And so it's important for people like ourselves, like yourself in particular, to help people understand things better. And so maybe don't be afraid to bring some numbers to that, that conversation. At a certain point, somebody asked, well, is it fair to make a profit of this much or that much? Because that's part of that sequence.
In term of excess profits.
That's right. Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Is it competitive enough out there to put a lid on that? And so I think those are the kinds of questions that are much harder to grapple with, and I can't expect politicians to have a magic answer to that. And so you need to help people understand it on a daily basis. And if they do, then they'll say, yeah, well, thank goodness I can go to the store without even thinking about it and get what I need. If I go to, say a discount store, well, it works for 75% of the time, and then I got to stop by the other store to get the other thing on my list. Well, that extra convenience and selection, that costs money. It's like insurance in a way. You're carrying more stuff. And so I think helping people understand that is the key. I don't think there's a way to change it, except, as you say, maybe there are regulatory layers that could overall reduce pricing, reduce costs for those in the system. And that would be sort of thing that Canada always never explores, but should.
Well, it's the irony that we've got probably one of the world's greatest set of free trade agreements, except inside the country, right?
Yeah, that's crazy, right?
I think it's probably overestimated the degree to which it would contribute to GDP if you got rid of them all. I've heard like 2% or 1% seems a very big number, but
those are tiny numbers compared to the truth.
Right.
Okay, very careful work has been done on that, and more than once. If you look at the IMF has put out studies of this, and a key player is one of our own economists here in Canada, Trevor Toome. He's out in Calgary.
Yep.
And so a very conservative process of understanding those things would give us at least 4 percentage points of free money. It's like there's a $20 bill on the sidewalk, and we refuse to bend over to pick it up. It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And so I've argued about this for a long time. The latest numbers suggest it's as high as 7%. And where are the biggest numbers? The biggest numbers are in the places with the most red tape, and that's Atlantic Canada. There we're looking at double-digit income increases if you would relax those things. And yet there's always a local interest that says, well, wait a minute. But, things like we have 8 different home furnace specifications across Canada. Now, there's good intentions there. It's a provincial reg. So the province says, somebody had a problem with their furnace, let's add another regulation. And the other provinces don't follow suit because they didn't have that accident.
Right.
And so over time, it just kind of gets divergent. And yet imagine if you're a producer of furnaces. Or if you're a truck driver and you have to get out and crank down the extra set of wheels because you're at the provincial border.
And these numbers you talk about, whatever the number is, 2, 3, 5, 7, double digits.
It's real money. It's real money.
And it's hard to come by, right?
Yeah.
These things are very hard to come by. So leads me to my last question. If you're advising policymakers today, you probably have conversations with many of them. What's the single most important lever to make sure that Canadians can maintain their standard of living that we've come to enjoy in this turbulent? I draw upon your book and these big waves, but what can we do? What can we actually do to keep our standard of living and keep the food on the shelves and do all those great things?
I'd say if you forced me to pick one, so here it is. I would say the answer is in technology, and if we look back at the don't forget our history. Third Industrial Revolution, there was a 15% gain in incomes because of that. The computer chip, simple thing like that. And that 15%, we were slow to embrace and adopt the technology, and we probably haven't achieved the 15% yet, okay? And so what we should be doing in this one is not doing that. We should instead be accelerating, lean into this new technology that's arriving, and don't lag like we usually do, And so from a government standpoint, what they should be doing is super incentivizing business investment and entrepreneurialism to encourage that extra growth to come. We should see a hockey stick of progress. And yes, I know people will say, well, that's going to cause some job losses, or it's going to be hard for the youth to break in. I know. And we need to enhance the tools, like I mentioned before, in order to make sure that that downside is covered. And if we do that, what we're going to see is we'll get the early adoption wave, and that'll generate the extra incomes that's going to make us all better off. But I could go on about, trade is super important. We got to somehow replace that 2%.
Yeah.
That's the minimum.
Yeah.
And I think the government has the handle on that. I'm not too worried about that now. We're going to get there. But the growth trajectory is another matter. That's companies that do that.
Right.
And if you make a complex or challenging income tax system or corporate tax system, you keep all that red tape in there, I don't think it's going to happen. And we need to get in there and super incentivize it and clean up, make it simpler so that it's obvious that this is a place to invest in.
Well, what a great way to end our time together. Such a great conversation. I really enjoyed meeting you again and talking to you a second time. And thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure and follow us and give us a 5-star review in your favorite podcast app and tell your friends and colleagues all about us. New episodes of The Feed, powered by Loblaw, will show up regularly on your favorite podcast app and on our YouTube page, where you can watch the full video of each episode at The Feed, powered by Loblaw. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker and producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.